to Sign Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice, from legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems. We explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Sign Facts and step beyond the screen. The rules couldn't be simpler. One lap, and whoever crosses the finish line first wins. Unlike technical street racing, this is all about straight line speed and pure acceleration. The girl kicks things off in her own dramatic fashion, tossing her bra into the air as the signal to start. Both cars launch forward instantly, the Dodge and the Monte Carlo tearing down the road side by side. But the boyfriend doesn't play fair. Using a friend's car, he blocks Sean's path, turning an already narrow road into a full-blown obstacle course, with no clear way through. Sean veers off onto a rough dirt path near a construction site and pushes the car even harder. For a moment, it looks like he might actually pull ahead. Then he spots it, a dead end straight in front of him. There's no time to think. He clenches his jaw and barrels forward anyway, forcing his way through the only path available. Even if it means risking everything, somehow he manages to catch up, and as he pulls alongside the red Dodge, he throws the girl a confident wink that gets a grin out of her. That single moment is what pushes the boyfriend over the edge. Now it isn't about winning anymore, it's personal. Driven by anger, he starts ramming his car into Sean's again and again. Finally, one heavy hit sends both vehicles spinning out of control. The red Dodge slams violently into a sewer pipe, while Sean's Monte Carlo flips and rolls before finally coming to a stop. The crash leaves all three of them bruised and battered, and soon enough they're hauled off to the police station. Sean's mother shows up, clearly worn down by the pattern. In just 2 years she's already had to move 3 times because of his reckless behavior. This time, she's had enough. Without hesitation, she makes her decision. Sean is being sent away. She puts him on a plane to Japan, where his father is stationed. His parents have been separated for years, and now Sean finds himself heading to Tokyo, a place completely foreign to him. As he stares out the car window at the vibrant, fast-paced city, his thoughts are all over the place. A confusion, frustration, curiosity, all tangled together. But this moment marks the start of something much bigger. After tracking down his father's address, Sean rings the doorbell. It takes a while, but the door finally opens. His father looks surprised to see him, remarking that he's arrived earlier than expected. He tells Sean to wait a second, and then, somewhat awkwardly, a Japanese woman slips out of the room, clearly someone his father had been spending time with. The apartment itself is tiny, almost cramped, and it's obvious his father has been living alone for a while. There's barely enough space, and Sean ends up in a small storage room, just big enough to fit a bed. When he pulls back the curtain, an elderly woman from the neighboring building greets him cheerfully, adding a strange bit of warmth to the unfamiliar surroundings. Before long, Sean finds himself starting a whole new life as a student at a Japanese high school. Everything feels different. He puts on a uniform, catches a packed train early in the morning, swaps his shoes for indoor ones at school, lines up neatly for lunch, and even learns to eat with chopsticks. Surprisingly, he adjusts faster than expected, and it isn't long before he meets his first real connection there, a smooth-talking guy known as Twinkie. Twinkie's always hustling, selling random gadgets and odds and ends to anyone willing to buy. He proudly tells Sean he owns a car, something special, which immediately grabs Sean's attention. Curious, he asks to see it. Twinkie takes him to a parking garage, building it up the whole way. But when they get there, it's not exactly what Sean pictured. Instead of some high-performance machine, it's a green Volkswagen. Sean can't help but feel a little underwhelmed, but hey, at least it's something with wheels. So where do car enthusiasts hang out in Tokyo? Twinkie has the answer. He takes Sean to an underground car scene, a place packed with modified rides and passionate drivers. As Sean looks around, taking in the impressive builds and custom designs, something catches his eye. A girl stepping out of a heavily modified Mazda RX-8. Her presence is impossible to ignore, and in that instant Sean realizes he stepped into a whole new world of racing. Something about her feels familiar, and it doesn't take long for it to click. Hey, she's actually in his class. Her name is Neela. Curious and confident as ever, Sean walks over and strikes up a conversation, completely unaware that he's stirring up trouble. Not far off, someone is watching, and not happily. Around here, everyone knows him as DK. The moment he notices Sean talking to Neela, his expression hardens. It doesn't take long to understand why. Neela is his girlfriend. DK steps in and warns Sean to keep his distance, but Sean isn't the type to back down. Instead, he fires back with a sarcastic remark, clearly unfazed. Tension builds fast. DK looks ready to make an example of him, but then he remembers he has a race coming up and decides it isn't worth the distraction. That should have been the end of it, but Sean isn't done. Fueled by pride, he throws out a challenge on the spot. "I'll race you." DK looks at him like he's joking. Sean doesn't even have a car of his own, so what exactly is he planning to race with? Just then, a calm but commanding figure steps forward. It's Han. Without much explanation, he tosses Sean a set of keys. "You can take mine." Han and DK have business ties, but in this moment Han seems more interested in seeing what this reckless newcomer is made of. Sean, still oblivious to the deeper dynamics at play, accepts without hesitation. On the way to the race, Sean casually asks Twinkie if DK's car is anything special. Twinkie gives him a look that says it all. "Do you even know why they call him DK?" he asks. "It means Drift King." The term means nothing to Sean. He frowns, confused. What's drifting? He's about to find out the hard way. The car Han lent him isn't just any vehicle. It's a finely tuned Nissan Silvia S15, a machine admired in drifting circles as something close to a masterpiece. Equipped with a turbocharged engine pushing around 250 horsepower, it demands real skill to control, and Sean has none. Nervous now, he asks Twinkie for a quick lesson. Twinkie half-jokingly tells him, "When you hit a corner, yank the handbrake and floor it." Not exactly a confidence booster. The race lineup is set. Sean in the Silvia against DK in a Nissan Fairlady 350Z, a more powerful car with around 287 horsepower. The atmosphere tightens as the start signal approaches. Once the race begins, Sean does what he knows best. He slams the accelerator and surges ahead in a straight line. For a brief moment it looks like he has the upper hand. DK, meanwhile, stays calm and unhurried. Sean allows himself a small taste of victory, right up until everything changes in an instant. A sharp turn appears ahead. Unprepared and inexperienced, Sean panics, and with no understanding of drifting, he drives straight into a support pillar in a brutal crash. Meanwhile, DK slides through the corner effortlessly, his car gliding as if it's part of the road itself. Desperate to catch up, Sean gets back into the chase, but from here on it's a one-sided display. The parking structure is full of tight corners at the perfect stage for DK's skill. He hugs every turn with precision, barely grazing the walls, while Sean struggles to keep control, crashing again and again. Metal scrapes against concrete, sparks fly, and the car steadily falls apart. Then comes the final stretch, a spiraling ramp leading up to the rooftop. DK takes it flawlessly, drifting upward in one smooth, continuous motion, leaving everyone watching in awe. Behind him, Sean's car is barely holding together, and by the time he reaches the finish line, the Silvia is completely wrecked. The race is over. Sean has lost badly, and as he stands there, limping and battered, he watches DK drive off with Neela, frustration burning inside him. But things aren't finished yet. Han approaches him, calm as always, and tells him something unexpected: he shouldn't leave the city. That night, Sean comes home already bracing for trouble, and his father is furious. The lecture that follows is harsh and direct. If Sean keeps going down this path, he could end up in serious trouble. maybe even prison. For a while, Sean tries to keep his head down and settle back into the routine of a normal student, but it doesn't last. One afternoon after school, he finds Han waiting for him outside the gates, leaning against a sleek Mazda RX-7. Without much explanation, Han motions for him to get in. They drive to a traditional Japanese bathhouse, where Han tells Sean to go inside and find someone named Claw to collect money. Sean has no idea what he's talking about, but he goes in anyway. Inside, it doesn't take long to figure it out. A massive sumo wrestler stands out immediately, his back covered in a fierce tiger tattoo with extended claws. That has to be the guy. Sean approaches him and tries to demand the money, but before he gets anywhere, he's thrown out without hesitation. That would discourage most people. Not Sean. Stubborn as ever, he goes right back in and gets thrown out again. Eventually the sumo wrestler storms outside, clearly fed up, and hands the money over to Han just to be rid of him. Han watches the whole thing with quiet interest. There's something about this kid, his persistence, his refusal to back down, that catches his attention, and that's when Han makes a decision. He brings Sean into his circle, offering him a role as his driver, someone he can rely on whenever needed. Not long after, Han takes him to a pachinko parlor, one of those places packed with loud, pinball-like machines, hugely popular and often controlled by organized groups. As it turns out, this particular parlor belongs to DK, and that's when Sean begins to understand the bigger picture. DK's uncle is a powerful figure in the Yakuza, and both DK and Han work under that influence while also running their own side operations. From the start, not everyone welcomes Sean. One of DK's men takes an immediate dislike to him and even tries to provoke a bet involving one of their boss's cars. Meanwhile, Han and DK step aside to talk business, leaving Sean outside. Checking the time, Sean realizes he's running late again and calls his father to let him know, with a sigh, that he won't be home on time again. While he's on the phone, someone else arrives on the scene, Neela, who's come looking for DK. Spotting Sean, she quietly warns him that this isn't the kind of place he should be hanging around. It's clear she isn't as reckless as the people surrounding her. Later, Han brings Sean to his own territory, a fully equipped garage packed with tools and modified machines, like stepping into a mechanic's dream. Without much ceremony, he hands Sean the keys to a red Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 7. This isn't just any car, it packs around 280 horsepower, a 6-speed manual transmission, advanced handling systems, and a reinforced frame built for performance. For anyone serious about driving, it's a machine worth respecting. With that, Sean's real training begins. He starts practicing drifting at an abandoned pier by the ocean. The wide open space gives him plenty of room to experiment and to crash a lot. He slams into barriers, spins out repeatedly, and struggles to keep the car under control, while two older men fishing nearby watch the chaos unfold, shaking their heads in disbelief. One morning, as Sean is getting ready for school, something catches his eye across the street. His father is out in the garage, working on a worn-out classic car. From the looks of it, it's an old 1967 Ford Mustang, though in rough shape, barely more than a shell. That moment sparks something unexpected. For the first time, father and son find common ground. They start talking, not arguing, not clashing, but genuinely connecting over their shared interest in cars. His father offers him two pieces of advice, drawn from old Eastern sayings: the bird that stands out gets shot first, and the child who cries gets the candy. Simple lessons, but meaningful ones, about knowing when to stand out and when to stay quiet. His father hopes these words will help Sean navigate life in Japan a little more wisely. At school, things take another turn. Sean is suddenly dragged up to the rooftop by a group of students. It turns out Twinkie has gotten himself into trouble again, this time for selling fake electronics to the wrong people. One of DK's associates isn't amused and has already started roughing him up. As tensions rise and it looks like a fight is about to break out, Sean steps in. Instead of throwing punches, he pulls out his own device and hands it over as compensation. And just like that, The situation cools down. The crowd, expecting chaos, loses interest and drifts off. From the sidelines, Neela has been watching the whole thing. As she approaches Sean, she tells him quietly, "You handled it well." That night, Sean and Han stand together on a rooftop, looking out over the city lights. Han speaks calmly, sharing his thoughts on life. That things aren't as complicated as people make them out to be. Once you make a decision, you stick with it, no second guessing, no regrets. Sean reflects on his own past. Back in America, he'd been nothing but trouble, constantly running from consequences, until his mother couldn't keep up anymore and sent him away, hoping a change of scenery might help. Now, in Tokyo, things feel different. His father gives him structure, discipline, a sense of boundaries. Han, on the other hand, has become something like an older brother, pointing him in a direction, showing him a way forward. Slowly, Sean begins to change. Although Han is incredibly skilled behind the wheel, he rarely races. Instead, he shows Sean what drifting means to him, not just the technique, but the lifestyle built around it. For Han, it was never about competition, it's about freedom, connections, and living in the moment. He jokes that drifting is his way of meeting beautiful women and enjoying life on his own terms. From there, the training intensifies. Han personally guides Sean step by step, teaching him how to control the car, how to feel the road, even taking him out to winding mountain roads where every turn demands precision. Day after day, night after night, Sean practices relentlessly, and eventually everything starts to click. The next time he returns to the parking garage for a race, this time against one of DK's crew, the difference is undeniable. On the same track where he was once humiliated, Sean now moves with confidence, drifting through corners smoothly and staying in control the whole way. This time, he wins. The victory feels different. It isn't just about beating someone, it's proof of how far he's come. Riding that momentum, Sean asks Neela out. The two spend the evening together over a late-night meal, and being outsiders in a foreign place, they find comfort in each other, talking endlessly about everything and nothing. Afterward, Neela takes him for a drive along a quiet, moonlit slope. The atmosphere is calm, almost dreamlike, a rare moment of peace, and something deeper begins to form between them. But moments like that never last. Before long, DK tracks them down, and everything starts unraveling at once. It turns out Han had been skimming money during their operations, quietly keeping a portion for himself, and the discrepancy has been discovered by DK's uncle, the powerful figure behind it all. To DK, it's a betrayal, and seeing Neela with Sean only makes things worse. In his eyes, both his business partner and his girlfriend have turned against him. Enraged, DK pulls out a gun and aims it directly at Han. In the tense standoff, Twinkie reacts quickly, slamming down a metal shutter to create a distraction, and in the chaos, Han and Sean jump into a car and speed off with DK close behind. The pursuit turns into a high-speed chase through the city streets, and then, in a split second, everything goes wrong. A passing car collides with them, sending Han's vehicle flipping out of control. The impact is devastating as the car crashes violently, and in the explosion that follows, Han is killed instantly. The loss hits hard, and Sean barely has time to process it before he grabs Neela and the two rush back to his father's place, hoping to find safety. But DK isn't far behind. He tracks them down and confronts them outside, demanding that Neela come with him. Tension rises as DK points his gun at Sean, but before anything can happen, Sean's father steps in and levels his own weapon. The standoff freezes everyone in place. No one moves until Neela, to break the deadlock and protect Sean, makes a decision of her own. She walks over to DK and chooses to go with him, and Sean stands there, helpless, watching her leave. In a single night, he's lost everything. The girl he cared about is gone, and the man who guided him, who believed in him, is dead. And all of it traces back to one person. This time, Sean isn't going to run. For the first time, his father doesn't try to stop him, because now he can see it clearly. His son has changed. He isn't the reckless kid from before anymore. He's ready to face things head-on. Sean turns to the one person he knows he can still rely on, Twinkie. Without hesitation, Twinkie hands him a heavy bag of cash. It isn't just random money. Han had been planning ahead, quietly preparing for the day he might have to break away from DK. And this stash was meant as a safety net, enough to cover at least part of what's owed to the Yakuza. Clutching the bag, Sean makes a bold move. He goes straight to the source, the Yakuza's headquarters. This isn't just about settling a score anymore. He wants to face the man pulling the strings behind everything, DK's uncle. Inside, the atmosphere is tense. Sean stands before the boss, with DK present as well. Without hesitation, he sets the money down as repayment for Han's missing funds. But he doesn't stop there. Sean proposes a resolution, simple but decisive. A race. Winner stays, loser leaves Tokyo for good. The room falls quiet for a moment. The boss, now satisfied after receiving the money, seems more relaxed, and after considering it briefly, he agrees it's a clean solution that avoids further complications. From the way things play out, it's clear the boss has already begun distancing himself from DK. After all, much of his success came through Han's involvement. And with Han gone, DK's value has diminished. Sean's proposal simply gives him a convenient way to settle everything. There's just one problem. Sean doesn't have a car. Determined, he and Han's old crew rush back to the garage, hoping to find something they can use. But when they get there, their hopes drop as the police have already cleared the place out, taking nearly everything. For a moment it feels like a dead end. Then someone notices something in the back. The Nissan Silvia S15, the same car Sean once destroyed, is still there. It's not in great shape, but when Sean pops the hood, he sees what matters most: as the engine is still intact. That's enough. An idea sparks instantly. Since the Silvia's body is beyond saving, they decide to pull the engine and transplant it into something else: his father's old 1967 Ford Mustang. What was once a worn-out shell suddenly becomes the foundation for something entirely new. Piece by piece, the team rebuilds it together, and by the time they're done, the result is something unique, a fusion of classic muscle and modern performance. The night before the race, Sean stands at the top of a mountain road, staring down at the winding path below. This isn't just another racetrack. It's narrow, dangerous, and unforgiving. One mistake could send a car straight off the edge. When race day arrives, the stakes are clear. The Yakuza boss shows up to watch. DK pulls in, still behind the wheel of his Nissan Fairlady 350Z, as confident as ever. The race begins, and right from the first turn DK takes the lead, his experience on mountain roads giving him the edge. Sean follows closely, staying focused. Then, at the next corner, Sean makes his move with precise control. He drifts through the turn, using the momentum to slip past DK and take the lead. It's smooth, calculated, and it works. But DK isn't about to lose quietly. He falls back on his old tactics, slamming into Sean's car again and again, trying to force him off the road. The cliffside looms dangerously close, the drop below offering no second chances. Each time, Sean manages to recover, drawing on everything he's learned, but the attacks keep coming, growing more aggressive. Then, in a critical moment, as DK charges forward for another hit, Sean does something unexpected. He slams on the brakes. Caught off guard, DK can't react in time. His car loses control, lifts off the ground, and spirals over the edge, disappearing down the mountainside in seconds. Silence follows. The race is over. Sean has won. True to his word, the Yakuza boss honors the agreement, allowing Sean and Neela to leave without interference. From that point on, they're free, and with DK gone, a new name takes his place. Sean becomes the new Drift King of Tokyo. Life begins to settle. Neela stays by his side, and the two grow closer, enjoying the peace they fought so hard for. But in this world, things rarely stay quiet for long. One day, someone shows up claiming to be connected to Han, and he's come with one purpose: to challenge Sean. There's a very specific kind of statement the film makes in its first few minutes, and The Fast and the Furious, Tokyo Drift wastes absolutely no time making one. It opens not with a quiet setup or character introductions, but with chaos, a high-speed race tearing through a half-built suburban development. It's loud, reckless, and completely over the top. Cars crash through unfinished houses, engines scream, metal bends, and within seconds the film is already telling you exactly what matters here. This isn't about subtle storytelling, it's about impact. That opening race does more than just grab attention, it defines the entire identity of the film. The exaggerated stakes, the macho energy, the sense that logic takes a back seat to spectacle, it's all there, front-loaded before the story even properly begins. You're not eased into this world, you're thrown into it at full speed, and in a way, that's the point. From that very first sequence, Tokyo Drift makes its priorities crystal clear. The film isn't trying to reinvent the formula, it's doubling down on it. Fast cars, risky decisions, adrenaline-fueled chaos. Everything is amplified, everything is immediate. But there's something else buried in that opening too. For all its intensity, there's a sense of familiarity to it. The structure, the setup, even the outcome all feel like something we've seen before. At a rebellious teenager, the dangerous race, the inevitable consequences, playing out exactly the way you'd expect. That predictability turns out to matter, because it hints at a larger pattern the film will keep following. So while the sequence is undeniably energetic, even entertaining, it also quietly reveals one of the film's biggest limitations. It isn't here to surprise you, it's here to deliver a very specific experience, built on speed, style, and spectacle. If you're on board with that, the opening works. It hooks you, excites you, pulls you straight into the chaos. But if you're looking for something deeper, more layered or unexpected, the first few minutes already tell you that might not be what you're getting. Either way, by the time that opening race crashes to a halt, one thing is clear: Tokyo Drift knows exactly what it is, and it isn't slowing down for anyone. After that explosive opening, the film finally slows down just enough to introduce the foundation of its story. And at its core, Tokyo Drift is built on one of the most familiar setups imaginable. Sean Boswell is a problem, not in a complex or layered way, but in the simplest sense possible. He's reckless, impulsive, and addicted to the thrill of racing. Trouble follows him everywhere, and by the time we meet him, it's already clear this isn't his first mistake, it's just the one that finally catches up with him. That opening race isn't just spectacle, it's the breaking point. With the law closing in and no chances left, Sean is pulled out of his world entirely and sent somewhere that couldn't feel more different. Tokyo. It isn't a choice, it's a consequence, a last attempt to straighten him out under the strict supervision of his father, who lays down two simple rules: go to school, and stay out of trouble. Of course, that doesn't last, because what makes this setup interesting isn't just the relocation, it's the contrast. Sean isn't just in a new city. He's completely out of his depth. Different language, different culture, different rules. Everything that once defined him suddenly doesn't apply. For a moment, it feels like the film might lean into that discomfort, the idea of an outsider struggling to adapt, navigating a world he doesn't understand. That's a compelling angle. But then the film makes its real move. Instead of focusing on cultural adjustment, it pulls Sean right back into what he knows best: racing. Through a new set of connections, he's introduced to Tokyo's underground scene, where the rules are different, the stakes are higher, and the style of driving is something entirely new: drifting. And just like that, the direction of the film becomes clear. This isn't a story about escaping bad habits, it's about carrying them into a new environment. Sean doesn't change so much as adapt. The same recklessness that got him into trouble becomes the very thing that pulls him deeper into Tokyo's racing world. That creates an interesting tension. On one hand, the setup promises growth, a chance for Sean to learn, evolve, maybe even mature. On the other, everything around him keeps reinforcing the same behavior that defined him from the start. That contradiction sits right at the heart of the film, because from this point on, Tokyo Drift isn't really about whether Sean will stay out of trouble, it's about how far he's willing to go once he's back in it. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear, Tokyo isn't a place where he escapes his past. It's a place where that past evolves into something much bigger. And this is where Tokyo Drift does something that, at the time, felt almost unthinkable for a franchise like this. It walks away from everything that made it recognizable. No familiar faces, no returning leads, no direct continuation of the story audiences had been following. Instead of building on what came before, the film hits reset. New characters, new location, new tone, for a series still trying to define itself. That's not just a creative decision, it's a risk. Up until this point, the Fast and the Furious franchise had been anchored by its core personalities. Whether you connected with them or not, they gave the series a sense of identity. Remove them, and you're left with a question the film never stops circling: is this still part of the same franchise, or is it something else entirely? Tokyo Drift doesn't answer that right away. In fact, for most of its runtime it almost sidesteps the question altogether. The story unfolds in isolation, disconnected from the events and characters that came before. There's no reliance on continuity, no effort to tie threads together. If anything, it feels like a standalone racing film that just happens to carry the Fast and Furious name. For some viewers, that works. Stripped of expectations, the film can be approached on its own terms, a self-contained story about a kid, a new city, and a different style of racing. In that light, the absence of familiar characters becomes less of a loss and more of a clean slate, allowing the film to experiment and explore a different corner of this world without being weighed down by legacy. For others, though, that same decision feels like a disconnect, because without those familiar anchors, the film risks losing what made the franchise feel cohesive in the first place. The emotional continuity, the recognizable dynamics, the sense that each installment builds towards something larger. Much of that is largely missing here. Instead, you get a film that feels separate, almost like a spin-off rather than a true sequel. That tension defines the experience. For most of the runtime, Tokyo Drift exists in its own lane, unbothered by what came before, focused entirely on its own story. It's only in the final moments, with a brief but impactful cameo, that the film suddenly reconnects to the larger franchise. In that instant, everything shifts. The cameo doesn't just link the film back, it reframes it. What once felt isolated now feels intentional. What seemed disconnected now becomes a piece of a bigger puzzle. It's a small moment, but it carries a lot of weight, reminding the audience that this story does belong here, even if it took a different path to get there. So the question remains, is Tokyo Drift a true continuation of the franchise, or a standalone experiment wearing its name? The answer is both, and whether that balance works depends entirely on what you came in expecting. If there's one element Tokyo Drift leans on more than anything else to redefine itself, it's the setting, because moving the story to Tokyo isn't just a backdrop change, it's the film's biggest selling point. From the moment Sean steps into the city, everything feels different. The neon lights, the crowded streets, the vertical sprawl of buildings stacked on top of one another. It creates an energy that's instantly distinct from the wide, open roads of the earlier films. This is a tighter world, faster, more controlled, and that shift directly shapes how the action unfolds. Racing here isn't about straight-line speed anymore, it's about precision. Tight corners, narrow streets, multi-level parking garages, winding mountain roads. Tokyo demands a completely different driving style, and that's where drifting comes in. Not just as a gimmick but as a natural extension of the environment. The city itself demands it, and you don't dominate these roads by going faster, you dominate them by mastering control. Visually, the film knows how to sell that. There's a constant emphasis on movement through space. The way headlights reflect off glass buildings, the glow of neon bouncing off polished car surfaces, the blur of color as vehicles slide through impossibly sharp turns. At its best, the film turns Tokyo into something almost surreal, a playground of light and motion. But beneath all that style, there's a question the film never fully answers: how much of this world is real, and how much is just aesthetic? While the setting feels immersive on the surface, the film rarely digs deeper into it. The Yakuza are present, but more as a narrative device than a fully explored element. The underground racing scene exists, but mostly as a stage for action rather than a culture with depth. Even the day-to-day life of Tokyo is largely pushed aside in favor of keeping the story moving. It creates a strange contrast. On one hand, the film is visually rich, there's always something striking to look at. On the other, it often feels like the city is being observed from a distance rather than lived in. It's Tokyo as an idea, Tokyo as spectacle. And yet, that spectacle works, because even if the film doesn't fully explore its setting, it absolutely uses it. The environment shapes the racing, the tone, and the identity of the film in ways that set it apart from what came before. It may not be deeply authentic, but it's undeniably effective in giving Tokyo Drift its own visual signature. So while the story might feel familiar, the world around it doesn't, and for a franchise trying to evolve, that difference matters. Once you move past the surface of the cars, the lights, the energy, the real question begins to take shape. What kind of story is Tokyo Drift actually telling? Because beneath all that motion, the narrative itself is surprisingly thin. At its core, the film follows a very familiar blueprint. A reckless outsider arrives in a new world, struggles to find his place, learns the rules, earns respect, and eventually rises to challenge the person at the top. It's the classic underdog arc, simple, direct, easy to follow, and to be fair, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. For some viewers, that simplicity actually works in the film's favor. It keeps the story accessible, lets the action take center stage, and avoids unnecessary complications. You always know where things are headed, and in a movie built around speed and spectacle, that clarity can be a strength. But here's the problem: simplicity is one thing, a lack of depth is another. While the structure is there, the substance often isn't. The film moves from one major beat to the next without giving those moments the time or weight they need to resonate. Relationships form quickly, conflicts escalate suddenly, and resolutions arrive without much emotional build-up. It's less like watching a story unfold and more like watching a series of checkpoints get ticked off. You meet the rival, you lose the first race, you find a mentor, you train, you return for the final showdown. It all happens exactly as expected, and almost exactly as quickly. That predictability becomes hard to ignore. There are very few surprises along the way. The film rarely challenges its own structure or takes risks with its narrative direction. Instead, it leans heavily on familiarity, trusting that the formula itself is enough to carry the experience. For some viewers, that's acceptable. For others, it's the film's biggest weakness, because without stronger writing underneath it, the story never quite elevates the action around it. The emotional stakes feel limited, the character arcs feel underdeveloped, and the world itself never fully comes together in a meaningful way. And yet, despite all of that, the story isn't completely without value. There's a certain straightforwardness to it, a clean, almost stripped-down approach that fits what the film is trying to be. It doesn't pretend to be more complex than it is, and it doesn't hide behind twists or layered storytelling. It simply delivers a basic framework and lets everything else build on top of it. The issue is whether that framework is strong enough to support the film as a whole, and depending on who you ask, the answer changes completely. For some, it's a solid, no-frills underdog story that does exactly what it needs to do. For others, it's a missed opportunity, proof that style alone can't replace substance. Either way, one thing becomes clear very quickly: in Tokyo Drift, the story isn't driving the film, it's just trying to keep up with it. If the story gives Tokyo Drift its direction, pacing is what determines whether the journey actually feels engaging, and this is where the film starts to lose its rhythm. Structurally, it isn't consistent. In fact, it's almost split into three completely different experiences. It begins with that explosive opening race, fast, chaotic, instantly gripping. Within minutes you're pulled into the energy, the danger, the sheer intensity of what this film wants to be. It's the kind of opening that promises momentum, the kind that makes you expect the film to keep accelerating. But then something shifts. Once the story moves to Tokyo, the pace slows down significantly. The film settles into setup mode, new characters, new environment, new rules. On paper, that makes sense. The audience needs time to understand this world. The problem is it lingers. Scenes stretch longer than they need to. Key developments happen without urgency, and the narrative starts to drift, ironically mirroring the very concept it's built around. There's a noticeable dip in energy, and for a film centered on speed, that absence is impossible to ignore. At one point it even feels like the film forgets what it's supposed to be building toward. The racing, what should be the core driving force, takes a backseat for long stretches. The stakes don't escalate, the tension doesn't build, and the momentum established in the opening begins to fade. You're waiting for something to kick in, and it takes longer than it should. Then, almost suddenly, the film snaps back into motion. The final act arrives, and with it the energy returns. The races become sharper, the stakes finally feel defined, and the narrative pushes toward its conclusion with a sense of urgency that had been missing. The Mountain Road finale in particular delivers the kind of intensity the film had been holding back. It's engaging, it's focused, it works. But by that point, the imbalance is already clear, because when a film is strongest at its beginning and its end, it raises an important question about everything in between. That middle stretch, where the story should be developing, where the characters should be evolving, where the tension should be building, is exactly where Tokyo Drift struggles the most. Not because nothing happens, but because what does happen doesn't carry enough weight to keep you engaged. The pacing isn't broken, but it isn't smooth either. It starts fast, slows too much, then rushes to catch up, and while the final act does manage to recover some of that lost momentum, you can't help but feel the journey getting there could have been tighter, sharper, and far more compelling. Because in a film built on speed, momentum isn't just important, it's everything. At the center of Tokyo Drift is a character who's supposed to carry the entire film on his shoulders, Sean Boswell, and the way you respond to him will likely define how you feel about the movie as a whole. Sean isn't written as a complex protagonist, he's built on a very familiar foundation: the rebellious outsider, the kid who doesn't fit in, the one who learns the rules of a new world and eventually rises within it. It's a classic arc, one we've seen countless times before, and the problem is that familiarity only works when there's something underneath it. With Sean, that something feels inconsistent. From the start, he's defined by one trait above all else: recklessness. He doesn't think things through, he reacts, he pushes boundaries, makes impulsive decisions, and almost always chooses the riskier path. That's what gets him into trouble in the first place, and it follows him all the way to Tokyo. But once he gets there, the film presents an opportunity, a chance for change, for growth, for turning that recklessness into something more controlled and purposeful. On a structural level, that transformation does happen. He learns drifting, he trains, he adapts, he gains confidence. By the final act, he's no longer the same inexperienced driver who lost his first race. He's improved, more capable, more aware of the world around him. But here's where the disconnect happens. You don't always feel the change. While the film shows us the steps of his journey, it rarely lets us experience them on an emotional level. His development feels rushed, sometimes even implied rather than earned. Moments that should define his growth pass by quickly without the depth needed to make them land. Then there's the performance itself. Lucas Black brings a certain physical presence to the role, but the character often comes across as flat, detached, almost expressionless at times. There's a lack of emotional range that makes it hard to fully connect with him, especially when the film asks us to invest in his rise. It becomes even more noticeable when he shares the screen with stronger personalities. In those moments, Sean doesn't feel like the center of the story, he feels like someone moving through it. That doesn't mean the character doesn't work at all. For some viewers, the simplicity is part of the appeal. He's easy to understand, easy to follow, and his underdog journey, however predictable, still has a certain pull. Watching him go from outsider to competitor, from inexperienced to capable, can be satisfying on a basic level. But for others, that simplicity becomes a limitation, because when your lead character lacks depth, the entire film has to work harder to compensate. In Tokyo Drift, that burden often shifts elsewhere, onto the setting, the action, or the supporting cast, which raises an interesting question. Is Sean really the driving force of the film, or just the vehicle moving it forward? And depending on how you see him, the answer changes everything. If Sean Boswell is meant to be the center of Tokyo Drift, it's the characters around him who give the film whatever weight it manages to carry, because while the protagonist struggles to fully land, the supporting cast is where the movie finds its most interesting moments. It starts with Han. There's a calmness to his presence that immediately sets him apart. In a film filled with loud personalities and exaggerated energy, Han operates on a completely different frequency. He doesn't demand attention, he naturally draws it. There's something measured about the way he speaks, observes, and moves through this world, and more importantly, he feels like a character with a life beyond the screen. Where others are defined by a single trait, Han suggests real depth, a mystery, experience, a sense that he understands the consequences of the world he's part of, even if he chooses to stay in it. That makes his role more than just a mentor figure. He becomes the emotional anchor the film didn't quite find in its lead. It's no surprise he's the one audiences remember. Then there's DK, Takashi, the film's primary antagonist. On paper he has everything needed to be a compelling rival, a skilled, respected, deeply connected to the Yakuza. Positioned at the top of this racing hierarchy, he represents the standard Sean has to reach, the obstacle he has to overcome. But in execution, he feels more functional than fully realized. He's defined by dominance and control but rarely allowed to move beyond that. His motivation stays surface level. His personality remains narrow. While he serves the story effectively, he never quite evolves into a truly memorable antagonist. He's a presence, but not a layered one. Twinkie, on the other hand, plays a very different role. He's the gateway into this world, the one who introduces Sean to Tokyo's underground scene, explains the rules, and helps bridge the gap between outsider and insider. There's an energy to him, a looseness that contrasts with the film's more serious tone. At times it works, it adds personality and gives the film moments of levity, but it's also inconsistent. When the film leans into humor, he fits naturally. When it shifts into more serious territory, that same energy can feel out of place. It's a balancing act the film never fully stabilizes. And then there's Neela, positioned as both a romantic interest and a connection point between Sean and DK. She has the potential to be more than just part of the conflict. There are hints of history, hints of complexity, but they're never fully explored. Instead, she remains largely defined by her role within the central rivalry, important to the story, but not fully developed within it. Even Sonny Chiba's appearance, brief as it is, adds a certain weight to the world. His presence carries authority, reinforcing the Yakuza element and giving the film a sense of connection to something larger, even if that connection isn't deeply explored. That's really the pattern across the board. The supporting characters bring texture, they add energy, contrast, and occasionally depth. In some cases, like Han, they elevate the material. In others, they simply fill the roles the story requires. But taken together, they do something important. They compensate, because in a film where the lead doesn't fully command the screen, it's these surrounding figures who keep the world feeling alive. They provide the moments that stand out, the personalities that linger, the presence that holds your attention when the narrative itself starts to thin, which, in a way, says everything. A Tokyo Drift may be Sean's story, but it's the characters around him that make it worth watching. Once you start looking past the surface of Tokyo Drift, one thing becomes increasingly clear: the film isn't really built around performance. That becomes most noticeable in the acting and dialogue. Across the board, the performances feel uneven, not completely ineffective, but inconsistent enough that it's hard to stay fully immersed. Some scenes land exactly as intended, while others feel stiff, almost mechanical, as if the emotion never quite reaches the surface. A lot of that comes down to delivery. There are moments where lines are spoken rather than felt, where the dialogue exists to move the scene forward rather than reveal anything deeper about the characters. Conversations often feel functional, stripped down to their basic purpose: say what needs to be said, get to the next beat, move the story along. That approach creates a limitation, because without strong dialogue, Character relationships struggle to develop naturally, connections form quickly, conflicts escalate abruptly, and emotional beats don't always carry the weight they need to resonate. You understand what's happening, but you don't always feel it. At times, this even works against the film's tone. When the movie leans into seriousness, the performances don't always rise to meet that weight. Dramatic moments can feel undercut by flat delivery, and tension that should build instead just passes by. It's not that the actors aren't capable, it's that the material they're working with doesn't give them much room to elevate it. That said, it's not entirely without merit. There are flashes where the cast settles into their roles, moments of natural rhythm, bits of dialogue that feel more relaxed, even a few lines that manage to stick. The use of different accents and cultural backgrounds adds a certain authenticity to the world, even if it doesn't fully translate into stronger character work. But those moments are scattered. Overall, the film doesn't prioritize dialogue as a storytelling tool. It treats it more like a bridge, something that connects one sequence to the next rather than something that defines the experience. In a film like this, that's a deliberate choice. The focus is elsewhere, on movement, on visuals, on action. The expectation isn't that the audience will remember what was said, it's that they'll remember how it felt to watch. Still, that doesn't mean it goes unnoticed. When the dialogue lacks impact and the performances don't fully carry the emotional weight, it creates a gap. One the film has to fill through other means, and sometimes it does, but sometimes, you can feel exactly what's missing. Tone is one of the more surprising shifts in Tokyo Drift, and it's something you start to notice almost immediately once the film settles into its rhythm, because compared to what came before, this movie feels different. There's a clear move away from humor and the playful banter, the lighter energy. The moments that break tension with jokes are all noticeably reduced here. Instead, the film leans into a more serious, more grounded approach. The characters take themselves more seriously, the conflicts are framed with more weight, and even the atmosphere feels tighter and more focused. On paper, that sounds like a step forward. A more serious tone can add tension, raise stakes, and give the story a sense of importance that elevates everything around it. And at times, Tokyo Drift does benefit from that shift. Certain moments feel sharper because of it. The rivalries carry a bit more intensity, and the world feels less like a playground and more like a space with real consequences. But tone is a delicate balance, and here it doesn't always hold. While the film wants to be taken seriously, it doesn't always have the depth to support that weight. The story remains simple, the characters aren't fully developed, and the dialogue doesn't consistently deliver the emotional impact needed to match the tone. So what you get is a contrast, a film that presents itself with seriousness but occasionally slips back into the exaggerated, almost over-the-top energy the franchise is known for. Moments meant to feel intense can come across as unintentionally flat, and scenes aiming for realism are still surrounded by elements that feel heightened, stylized, even unrealistic. That creates a bit of friction. For some viewers, this shift works as the reduced humor makes the film feel more focused, more aligned with its central conflict, stripping away distractions and letting the racing and rivalries take center stage. For others, it does the opposite. Without that lighter touch, the film can start to feel heavy or even dull in places. The lack of humor removes a layer of personality, and without strong character depth to replace it, the experience can feel more rigid than engaging. It's a subtle but important trade-off, because entertainment isn't just about intensity, it's about variation, about knowing when to push forward and when to ease back. And Tokyo Drift, in trying to redefine its tone, sometimes forgets that balance. What's left is a film caught between two identities, not fully serious, not fully playful, just somewhere in between. Whether that works depends entirely on what kind of experience you were hoping for when you pressed play. At the end of the day, no matter how much you analyze the story, the characters, or the tone, Tokyo Drift lives or dies on one thing: the racing. This is where the film puts all of its focus, all of its energy, and all of its identity. Everything else, say plot, dialogue, Even character development often feels secondary to what happens once the engines start, and to its credit, the film does bring something new to the table: drifting. Instead of relying on straight-line speed or drag racing, Tokyo Drift shifts the entire dynamic. Now it's about control. About sliding through corners at impossible angles, maintaining precision in spaces that leave no room for error. It's a stylistic change that fits perfectly with the Tokyo setting, turning the races into something more technical, more fluid, almost like choreography. When it works, it's genuinely exciting. There's a sense of motion that feels different from previous entries, as the cars don't just move fast, they flow. Corners become the highlight rather than the obstacle, and the camera follows that movement, capturing the arcs, the slides, the near misses. It's visually distinct, and at times it's exactly what the franchise needed to stand apart. But that excitement isn't consistent, because while the concept is strong, the execution varies. Some races feel sharp and engaging, while others start to blur together. The repetition becomes noticeable, the tension doesn't always build, and in certain moments the editing makes it harder to follow what's actually happening, pulling you out of the experience instead of drawing you deeper in. There's also a question of impact. Earlier in the film, the races feel like introductions, demonstrations of skill, glimpses into the world. But as the story progresses, not every sequence carries meaningful stakes. You're watching movement, not always feeling consequence, and without that emotional weight, even high-speed action can start to feel distant. That's why the film's strongest moments stand out so clearly. The opening race grabs you immediately, chaotic, destructive, impossible to ignore. And then there's the final mountain showdown, where everything finally comes together. The stakes are clear, the rivalry is defined, and the race itself actually feels like it matters. It's tighter, more focused, and far more engaging than much of what comes before it. In those moments, Tokyo Drift delivers exactly what it promises. But between those peaks, the experience is less consistent, because while the film understands how to make racing look good, it doesn't always know how to make it feel essential. The spectacle is there, the screeching tires, the flashing lights, the controlled chaos, but the emotional connection behind it isn't always strong enough to sustain it. That creates a divide. For viewers who come purely for the cars, the speed, the visual thrill, this is more than enough. The film delivers on that level without hesitation. But for those looking for action that builds, evolves, and carries real narrative weight, it doesn't always get there. Because in Tokyo Drift, the racing isn't just part of the story, it is the story. And whether that's a strength or a limitation depends entirely on what you expect from it. If the racing is the heartbeat of Tokyo Drift, then its visual style is what gives that heartbeat its intensity. From a directorial standpoint, the film isn't subtle. Justin Lin steps into the franchise and immediately shifts the energy. There's a noticeable push toward movement, toward speed, not just in the cars but in the way the film itself is put together. Quick cuts, dynamic camera angles, sweeping shots that follow cars as they slide through tight corners. Everything is designed to keep the momentum alive, even when the story slows down. At its best, it works. There are moments where the camera feels like it's part of the race itself, gliding alongside the cars, weaving through traffic, pulling you into the chaos instead of keeping you at a distance. You feel the proximity, the danger, the precision. It creates a sense of immersion that aligns perfectly with the film's focus on drifting. But that same style can also work against it, because there's a fine line between energy and overload. At times the editing becomes too aggressive, cutting so quickly that it's hard to track spatial relationships. You know the cars are moving fast, but you're not always sure where they are in relation to each other. The clarity of the action gets lost in the attempt to amplify it, and when that happens, the impact weakens. Instead of building tension through clean visual storytelling, the film sometimes relies on sheer intensity, hoping that speed alone will carry the moment. It's exciting on a surface level, but it doesn't always hold together under closer scrutiny. That music video quality becomes hard to ignore. The combination of rapid editing, Stylized lighting, and heavy emphasis on soundtrack-driven sequences gives the film a polished, almost glossy feel. It's visually appealing, but occasionally it lacks the depth you'd expect from more controlled, deliberate direction. Style leads, but substance doesn't always follow. Still, it's not without its strengths. Lin clearly understands how to frame movement. He knows how to make cars look good, how to highlight the mechanics of drifting, how to turn a simple turn into something visually striking. And when the film slows down just enough to let those moments breathe, the direction really shines. There's also a sense that this is a transitional phase, and you can see the foundation being built, the stylistic choices, the kinetic energy, the approach to action. These are elements that would later define the franchise in a much bigger way. Here, they're still taking shape, not fully refined or always consistent, but undeniably present. That's what makes the direction of Tokyo Drift interesting. It's not perfect, it's not always controlled, but it's ambitious, trying to push the series forward, evolve its visual identity, find a new rhythm. And even when it stumbles, you can feel the intention behind it, because this isn't just a film that wants to show speed, it wants to feel fast. Whether it succeeds depends on how much you value style over precision, but one thing is certain, you'll never mistake it for something static. There's an element in Tokyo Drift that doesn't just support the action, it amplifies it. At the soundtrack. From the moment the film gets moving, the music becomes part of the experience, not something sitting quietly in the background but something actively driving the rhythm of every scene. Techno beats, hip-hop tracks, electronic pulses, each one is carefully layered into the film's high-speed identity, and when it clicks, it really clicks. The races don't just feel fast because of the visuals, they feel fast because of the sound. The music syncs with the movement, the cuts, the momentum. Engines roar, tires screech, and underneath it all there's a constant pulse pushing everything forward, creating an energy that's hard to ignore and turning even simple moments into something more intense. In many ways, the soundtrack becomes the film's emotional engine. Where dialogue falls short, music fills the gap. Where character depth is limited, sound carries the atmosphere. It tells you how to feel, when to feel it, and how intense that feeling should be. And in a film that prioritizes sensation over subtlety, that approach makes sense. But like everything else in Tokyo Drift, it's a double-edged sword, because when the music is doing that much work, it can start to feel like it's compensating for what's missing elsewhere. Instead of enhancing already strong moments, it sometimes becomes the thing holding them together. The energy is there, but it's being generated externally, not always from the scene itself. Still, there's no denying its impact. The soundtrack gives the film a distinct identity, tying into the urban setting, the underground racing culture, the stylized presentation. It's loud, aggressive, constantly in motion, just like the film itself. And then there are those moments where everything aligns, the right track hits at the right time, the visuals lock in, the pacing sharpens, and suddenly the film feels exactly as powerful as it wants to be. Those moments don't just elevate the scene, they define it, because in Tokyo Drift, sound isn't just part of the atmosphere, it is the atmosphere. It's what turns motion into momentum and speed into something you can actually feel. There's a pattern that becomes impossible to ignore the longer Tokyo Drift goes on. The film is at its strongest when it's either just beginning or about to end. Those two moments at the opening and the finale don't just stand out, they define the entire experience. Right from the start, that opening race hits with raw intensity. It's chaotic, destructive, almost absurd in how far it pushes things, but it works. It grabs your attention immediately, throws you into the film's world without hesitation, and sets a clear expectation for what's to come. For a brief moment, it feels like the film is going to maintain that level of energy throughout. Then the middle happens. While the film slows down to build its world and characters, it never quite recaptures the same level of engagement it established in those first few minutes. The momentum fades, the tension softens, and the energy becomes inconsistent. You're waiting for that spark to return, for something to bring it all back together, And eventually it does. The finale at the Mountain Road Race isn't just another sequence. It's the payoff the entire film has been building toward. This is where everything finally aligns. The rivalry is clear. The stakes are defined. And for the first time the race feels like it truly matters. The setting plays a huge role here. Unlike the crowded city streets, the mountain road opens up just enough to create a different kind of tension. Still tight, still dangerous, but now with a sense of isolation. No distractions, no spectators dominating the frame, just two drivers, one road, and everything on the line. That simplicity works in the film's favor. The action feels more focused. The pacing sharpens, the visuals become clearer. You can follow the movement, understand the stakes, and actually feel the race progress. It's not just about speed anymore. It's about control, precision, and outcome, and for a moment the film delivers exactly what it's been promising all along. But that also highlights something else, because when the opening and the ending are the most memorable parts of a film, it raises an unavoidable question about everything in between. The peaks are strong, no doubt. They showcase the film at its most confident, most engaging, most effective, but they also expose the inconsistency of the journey connecting them. It's like two powerful moments struggling to carry the weight of everything around them, and while they succeed in making an impact, they also leave you wondering how much stronger the film could have been if that same level of focus had been maintained throughout. In Tokyo Drift, the beginning hooks you and the ending delivers, but it's the space in the middle that decides how much those moments truly matter. For a film that leaned so heavily into a grounded, street-level world, Tokyo Drift raises a question that quietly lingers beneath the surface the entire time: how much of this is actually believable? The movie constantly presents itself as something rooted in reality, real streets, real cars, real consequences. It wants you to feel like this world exists just beneath the surface, hidden in plain sight, but the deeper you look, the harder that illusion becomes to maintain. It starts with the basics. Sean is placed in a high school environment that never quite feels authentic. The characters don't behave like students. The setting rarely functions like an actual school, and the idea that this entire underground racing culture exists so openly around them feels exaggerated. It's less a believable space and more a backdrop the film quickly abandons once it's no longer useful. Then there's the racing world itself. The film asks you to accept a reality where high-stakes street racing operates almost like an organized system, complete with hierarchy, reputation, and consequences that resemble a structured underworld. And while that idea is compelling on paper, the execution stretches credibility. The scale, the frequency, the lack of real-world consequences, it all starts to feel more like a stylized fantasy than something grounded in reality. But the biggest issue comes from the character progression. Sean goes from someone who barely understands drifting to someone capable of challenging and ultimately defeating a seasoned expert. And while the film tries to frame this as growth, it happens so quickly, with so little resistance, that it feels less like earned development and more like narrative convenience. You're not watching someone rise through skill, you're watching the story decide he's ready. That disconnect matters, because when the outcome of the film hinges on that final race, the believability of Sean's journey becomes essential. If you don't buy how he got there, it's harder to fully invest in what happens when he arrives. There are smaller details too, the way conflicts get resolved, the ease with which characters move between worlds, the lack of lasting consequences for dangerous actions. It all contributes to a sense that the film is operating on its own internal logic rather than reflecting anything real. To be fair, that's not necessarily a flaw in isolation. Tokyo Drift isn't trying to be a documentary. It's not aiming for strict realism. It's building a stylized version of reality where speed, risk, and image take priority over plausibility. But the issue is consistency, because the film occasionally presents itself as grounded, serious, and consequence-driven, while simultaneously asking the audience to accept scenarios that don't quite hold up under scrutiny. It wants the weight of realism without fully committing to it, and that creates a subtle tension. You're pulled into the world by its surface-level authenticity, but as the story unfolds, that foundation starts to feel less stable. The rules shift, the logic bends, and the line between believable and exaggerated becomes harder to define. In the end, it comes down to expectation. If you're willing to accept the film on its own terms, to embrace the stylization and overlook the inconsistencies, it works and the world feels cohesive enough to support the experience. But if you're looking for something that holds up logically, where actions, consequences, and character growth feel fully earned, Tokyo Drift doesn't quite get there. Because while it looks real, it doesn't always feel real. By the time Tokyo Drift settles into its rhythm, there's a realization that slowly becomes impossible to ignore. You've seen this before, not necessarily in the details, not in the setting, not in the drifting, not in the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, but in the structure and the way the story unfolds, hitting its beats one after another with almost mechanical precision. Underneath all the stylistic changes, the film is built on a formula the franchise has already used. The outsider enters a new world, challenges the dominant figure, fails, finds a mentor, learns the rules, and returns for the final showdown. It's clean, it's familiar, and most importantly, it's predictable. Now, predictability isn't always a flaw. There's a comforting structure, a sense of rhythm that lets the audience settle in, anticipate what's coming next, and enjoy the journey even if they already know the destination. Many films thrive on that kind of familiarity, but the difference is in the execution, because for a familiar structure to work, it needs variation, moments that feel fresh, unexpected, or emotionally distinct, something that breaks the pattern just enough to keep the experience engaging. That's where Tokyo Drift struggles. The film follows its blueprint so closely that it rarely surprises you. Each major turn arrives exactly when you expect it. Each conflict resolves the way you've already imagined, and even the emotional beats feel predetermined, as if the story is moving along a track it never intends to leave. It doesn't challenge the formula, it relies on it. And while the drifting concept adds a layer of visual distinction, it doesn't fundamentally change the narrative underneath. Strip away the setting, the cars, the style, and what's left is a story that could exist almost anywhere. That's why some viewers describe it as the same movie in a different location, because in many ways it is. The framework hasn't evolved, it's just been repackaged. But here's the interesting part. For some audiences, that's enough. If what you're looking for is a familiar experience, something that delivers exactly what it promises without deviation, then this structure works. Say it's reliable, easy to follow, and gives you the satisfaction of knowing where things are headed while watching them play out. But for others, it becomes limiting, because when a film doesn't take risks with its structure, when it doesn't push beyond what's expected, it starts to feel repetitive, not just within itself, but within the larger context of the franchise. That repetition creates a ceiling. No matter how good the individual moments are, no matter how strong the visuals or the action might be, the story can only go so far if it refuses to evolve. And Tokyo Drift, for all its stylistic ambition, never quite breaks free from that pattern. It moves fast, it looks different, but underneath it all, it's still following the same road. At a certain point, Tokyo Drift stops being judged only as a chapter in its own franchise and starts being measured against something much bigger. Once you strip away the branding, what you're left with is a racing film, and that places it in direct conversation with an entire genre that's been evolving for decades, a comparison that isn't always in its favor. There's a clear influence here from Asian street racing cinema. The emphasis on drifting, the tight mountain roads, the technical precision of the driving, it all echoes elements seen in earlier racing films from that space. You can feel the inspiration in the way the races are framed, in how the environment shapes the action, even in the overall tone of the competition. But influence and execution are two very different things, because while Tokyo Drift borrows the aesthetic, it doesn't always capture the depth that made those films work. In some of those stories, the racing isn't just spectacle, it's tied to character, to identity, to a deeper understanding of skill and discipline, and the action carries meaning beyond the moment. Here, it's more surface level. The races look good, they move well, they deliver excitement, but they don't always carry the same narrative weight. The connection between driver and machine, between skill and consequence, isn't explored with the same level of detail. It's implied, but rarely expanded, and that creates a gap. Compared to other racing films, especially those that treat driving as more than just action, Tokyo Drift can feel lighter, less grounded in its own subject matter. It adopts the style without fully embracing the substance behind it. At the same time, it's also competing with a different kind of benchmark, Hollywood action. A big, explosive, high-stakes set pieces where clarity, tension, and escalation are key. And in that space, the film faces its own challenges. Some sequences lack the precision needed to fully communicate what's happening. Others prioritize speed over structure, making them visually impressive but harder to follow. So it ends up caught between two worlds. On one side, the technical, character-driven racing films it draws inspiration from. On the other, the large-scale action spectacles it's trying to match. And while it takes elements from both, it never fully commits to either approach. But that doesn't mean it fails outright, because even within those comparisons, Tokyo Drift still manages to carve out its own identity. The combination of drifting, urban Tokyo, and stylized presentation gives it a distinct flavor, something recognizable, even if it's not the most refined version of what the genre can offer. It may not redefine racing films, and it may not outdo the best examples in the genre, but it does something different enough to stand alongside them, even if it never quite rises above them. And in a genre built on speed, precision, and control, sometimes just staying in the race is part of the achievement. By the time Tokyo Drift settles into its identity, one thing becomes very clear: this film knows exactly who it's made for, and it doesn't try to hide it. At its core, Tokyo Drift isn't chasing complex themes or layered storytelling. It's built around a very specific fantasy: speed, rebellion, and image. Fast cars tearing through neon streets, characters living on the edge, a world where respect is earned through risk and identity is defined by what you drive. It's not subtle, and it's not meant to be. The film leans heavily into that adrenaline-driven lifestyle. Everything is heightened at the way characters talk, act, carry themselves. There's a constant sense of attitude, of posturing, of proving something, not through dialogue or introspection but through action, through racing. Within that framework, the themes are simple but consistent: control versus chaos, outsider versus insider, respect versus dominance. Sean's journey fits neatly into the structure. He enters as someone out of control, reckless, unrefined, out of place, and the film positions drifting as the tool that brings that chaos into focus. It's not just about learning to drive differently, it's about learning discipline, even if that lesson comes through speed and risk rather than reflection. But again, it's all presented on the surface. The film doesn't dig deeply into these ideas or explore them in a nuanced way. Instead, it uses them as a backdrop, a thematic layer that supports the action rather than driving it, that ties directly into its target audience. Because this is a film designed for viewers who are here for the experience, not the analysis. Car enthusiasts, adrenaline seekers, younger audiences drawn to the style, the energy, the spectacle. It speaks directly to that crowd, delivering exactly what they're looking for without overcomplicating things. The cars are flashy, the races are loud, the world is stylized and exaggerated, a cinematic fantasy of speed and status. And for that audience, it works. But for viewers looking for something deeper, a strong character exploration, meaningful themes, emotional complexity, it can feel limited. Not because those elements are completely absent, but because they're never fully developed. They exist, but they don't evolve. That's the defining trade-off. Tokyo Drift chooses clarity over complexity, energy over introspection, style over substance. It builds a world that's easy to step into, easy to understand, and easy to enjoy, if you're aligned with what it's offering. So the question isn't whether the film succeeds on its own terms. It does. The real question is whether those terms are enough for you. Because if you're here for speed, style, and spectacle, Tokyo Drift delivers exactly that, and it never pretends to be anything else. There's another aspect of Tokyo Drift that sits just beneath the surface of all the speed and spectacle: the way it represents women. Once you start paying attention to it, it becomes hard to ignore. In this film, women rarely exist as fully realized characters. Instead, they're positioned around the action, present, visible, but often not central to the story itself. They're part of the environment, part of the atmosphere surrounding the racing world. Neela, the primary female character, comes closest to giving a woman narrative importance. She has connections to both Sean and DK, placing her directly within the central conflict, and there are hints of backstory, hints of emotional depth, even glimpses of independence, but those moments never fully develop. Instead, she's largely defined by her relationships, by how she fits into the rivalry between two men. Her role becomes less about her own journey and more about what she represents within the story: a connection point, a motivator, a piece of the conflict. Beyond her, the portrayal becomes even more limited. Throughout the film, women are frequently presented as part of the visual identity: stylized, glamorous, often reduced to background presence. They populate the racing scenes, the parties, the gatherings, adding to the film's aesthetic but rarely influencing its direction. It's not subtle as the camera lingers, and the framing emphasizes appearance over character. While this approach aligns with the film's broader focus on image and lifestyle, it also reinforces a very narrow perspective. Women are part of the world, but not shaping it. To be fair, this isn't unique to Tokyo Drift. It's a pattern across much of the genre, especially in films built around cars, competition, and hypermasculine environments, where the emphasis tends to fall on speed, dominance, and spectacle, with female characters often placed at the edges of the experience. But that doesn't make it invisible, because when a film leans this heavily into style, every element of that style becomes part of the conversation, including how people are presented within it. And here, the presentation is clear. Women are tied to the fantasy the film is selling. They're part of the image, part of the energy, part of the appeal, but they're rarely given the space to exist beyond that. That creates a limitation. The film builds a world that feels vibrant and alive, but it does so through a very specific lens, one that prioritizes certain perspectives while leaving others underexplored. Whether that stands out as a flaw or simply reflects the film's priorities depends on how you engage with it. Either way, it's a piece of the film's identity, one that moves just as consistently as the cars on screen, even if it's not always moving forward. By this point, the question practically asks itself: what exactly are you watching Tokyo Drift for? Everything about this film exists in a kind of tension between two very different ideas: entertainment and substance. On one side, it's easy to see why the movie works. It's fast, loud, visually engaging, the cars look incredible, the races carry energy, the setting adds a fresh layer of style. There's a constant sense of motion, a steady flow of spectacle that keeps the film moving even when the story itself slows down. For a lot of viewers, that's more than enough. This is the kind of movie you can sit back and experience rather than analyze. It doesn't demand deep investment or ask you to unpack complex themes or follow intricate character arcs. It gives you a world, fills it with speed and intensity, and lets you enjoy the ride. In that sense, it succeeds. But then there's the other side. Once you start looking beyond the surface, the limitations become clear. The story lacks depth, the characters aren't fully developed, and the dialogue rarely carries emotional weight. Many of the moments that should connect on a deeper level simply pass by without leaving a lasting impact, and that creates a gap between what the film shows you and what it makes you feel. The spectacle is undeniably there, but the substance underneath it isn't always strong enough to support it. So what you're left with is a film that moves quickly, looks impressive, and keeps your attention, but doesn't necessarily stay with you once it's over. That divide defines the experience. For some, Tokyo Drift is exactly what it needs to be: a fun, energetic, no-frills racing movie that delivers on its promise without overcomplicating things. It knows its audience, gives them what they want, and moves on. For others, it feels like a missed opportunity, because the foundation is there, the setting is strong, the concept has potential, but the characters could have been explored more deeply and the story could have carried more weight. There's room for something more, and the film never quite reaches it. It comes down to expectation. If you're looking for adrenaline, style, and a straightforward experience, the film delivers. If you're looking for depth, emotional resonance, or narrative complexity, it falls short. Neither perspective is wrong, because Tokyo Drift isn't trying to be everything. It's choosing one side of the balance. The question is whether the choice works for you. In the end, this isn't a film that blends entertainment and substance. It's a film that clearly picks one and drives full speed in that direction. And this is where Tokyo Drift becomes far more interesting than it first appears, because its true value isn't just in what it is, it's in what it leads to. On its own, the film feels like a detour, a side story, something disconnected from the main road the franchise had been traveling. New characters, new setting, a different tone. It almost feels like the series stepped away from itself, unsure of where to go next. But in hindsight, that detour looks a lot more like a turning point. This is the moment where Justin Lin steps in and begins reshaping the identity of the franchise. The energy, the pacing, the visual style, the emphasis on movement and spectacle, these are elements that would go on to define the series in a much bigger way. They're not fully refined here, but you can see them taking form. You can feel the shift. And then there's Han, a character who in this film feels almost self-contained, important within the story, but not necessarily central to the larger franchise. And yet he becomes one of the most enduring figures moving forward. His presence here doesn't just add depth to Tokyo Drift, it plants a seed that future films would build on in ways this movie never fully suggests. Even the timeline itself becomes part of the film's legacy. What initially feels like a disconnected story eventually gets woven back into the larger narrative through later installments. Events are revisited, recontextualized, even rewritten to make everything fit together. It's a clear sign that the franchise didn't leave Tokyo Drift behind, it found a way to bring it back into the fold. And then there's that final moment, a brief cameo that at the time felt like a simple nod to the past but, in retrospect, carries far more weight. It bridges the gap between what the series was and what it would become, reconnects the film to the franchise's core identity, and sets the stage for what comes next. Because after this, everything changes as the series evolves. The scale expands, the storytelling shifts, the characters return, and the foundation laid here, style, tone, direction, becomes part of something much bigger. That makes Tokyo Drift a strange kind of film. On the surface, it can feel like one of the most disconnected entries in the franchise, but in reality, it's one of the most important, not because it perfects the formula, but because it helps redefine it. It's not the destination. It's the pivot, the moment the franchise stops trying to repeat itself and starts becoming something else entirely. So after everything, as a setting, the characters, the racing, the style, the flaws, where does Tokyo Drift actually land? The answer isn't simple, because few films in this franchise divide opinion quite like this one. On one side, there are viewers who genuinely love it. For them, Tokyo Drift represents something pure, a return to the core idea of the series, racing at the center, a simple story, a focus on cars, culture, and competition without the distractions that would come later. It's clean, it's direct, and it delivers exactly what they want. For some, it's even one of the best entries in the franchise. But then there's the other side, viewers who see it as a step down. A film that strips away what made the earlier entries engaging without replacing it with something stronger. They point to the weak story, the flat protagonist, the inconsistent pacing, the lack of emotional depth. For them, those issues aren't minor, they define the experience. To them, Tokyo Drift isn't underrated, it's underwhelming. That split is what makes the film so interesting to talk about, because both perspectives are valid. This is a movie that delivers in very specific areas and falls short in others just as clearly. It succeeds when it leans into style, energy, and spectacle. It struggles when it asks for deeper investment in story or character. It introduces new ideas but doesn't always fully explore them. It takes risks, but not all of them pay off, and that leaves it in a unique position within the franchise. Not the strongest entry, not the weakest either, but one that stands apart, both in how it was received and in what it represents.